Well, good evening. Tonight, we're going to continue with our study on the church that Jesus built. And we're going to study a little more on, so we've studied about why we need to do things the way we do them. And we've studied, so we call that authority, and we've studied various different topics associated with that. And so now, tonight, I want to talk about, or I want to look at, how God organized the church. Can you grab my Bible? I think so, yeah. We want to. I think it's upstairs. Yes. So I want to look at tonight how God organized the church. So these positions that we're going to look at are not used. It's important that we get this point in our head that these are not titles. These are not something that we wear because we've earned it, like doctor. These are positions in the church. They're just offices, and it is called an office one time. Elders are called an office one time. So if we look at authority in the church, this is the way that a lot of denominations will look at how authority moves through the church. They have ushers, door greeters, and they call those deacons. And they have teachers, and they call those elders. They have pastors, and they call those bishops. And then over several churches, they will have something called a pastor over several churches, and then they have Jesus at the top. Or if you're part of the Catholics, they have the Pope at the top. When we look in the Bible, though, this is not what we find. And so we need to look at what the apostles were trying to leave for us, the record that they left for us. The writer of Acts, there in Acts chapter 2, and verse 42 says, right after they were converted, there at Pentecost, they were baptized, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. And so that's what we need to do. We need to look to see what the apostles have written for us, and we have a really good record of this. I mean, there's most of two books in the New Testament that deal with this subject. And so the apostles also taught that doctrine in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 in every church. So the application then is for that doctrine to be applied to us. And so the pattern that we find for local churches includes several different elements, but it includes an organization of the church. It includes how we worship and what we do during worship, and it includes the work of the church. What is the church supposed to be doing in its position in the community? Is its job to feed the world? Are we a food bank? Should we just put all of our effort into feeding people physically and not spiritually? Well, we're going to find out anyway in this lesson and the next couple lessons. We're going to find out what pattern emerges. So I want to remove from your mind any sort of system that you think might be the way it is, and let's look and see what the Scripture says it is, and see what the New Testament says regarding the organization of the Lord's church in the local sense, when we talk about on a local level. So don't do that. So the first question then is, should we be concerned about how the church is organized? Well, the organization of the church reveals a purpose. That when God creates something, He has a purpose in mind. He designs that creation to accomplish something. And that something is his purpose. And that creation needs to be organized to accomplish that thing. And so that's true here on earth in the physical realm. Certain animals were created as prey, and some are predators, and so the system works because God set it up that way, and it works. So we can look at the features of that animal, and we can kind of see what the purpose of that part of the animal is, and see what the purpose of that animal is. And the same thing is true when we look at a local church as well. We can look at the organization, and it will help us. We can look at the way the Lord organized it, the way He left for us, and we can see the purpose for the church. And so the reason I'm making this analogy is because it's going to be helpful later when we look at the work of the church. So the second point I'd like to make on as far as should we be concerned is apostasy. It's a fancy religious word for departure from the truth. So it says something in the Bible and we do something else. That's what we call apostasy. Apostasy often begins with changes in the organization of the church. One of the very first and earliest departures from the church in the New Testament was in the organization of the church. And so the same thing happens today and they often start the same way also. They start with a departure from the way God designed it. And that often occurs in the organization of the church. And so the organization of the church is revealed in the New Testament, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. And so God had a plan and a purpose in His mind, and He organized the church to meet that purpose. And so with that in mind, let's look at the next couple slides here and see how the church is organized. The first one that is obvious, because it's used so many different times, is elders. And unlike the chart that I just showed you, that had elders, bishops, and pastors being three different positions, these words all refer to the same person. And I could prove that on the last slide. On the very last slide I'll show you, because there are at least two passages that use three of these four words to refer to the same person. And so we know that they're all the same office. And so God set up elders to oversee the local congregation. So it's a congregation that once has grown, and the words that are used are fully developed. Once they have fully developed, they would have elders. Let me look real quick here and read Acts chapter 14. That it really was the plan of God to do those things. This wasn't something that man came up with. Acts chapter 14 and verse 16. Uh, 14 and verse 23. And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, having praying with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So they appointed elders once they had gone to those areas, and of course this was the apostles doing that. Those elders there are also called bishops and pastors. So let's look at the first word here. And we'll start here on the second row down. The first word is presbuteros. That's the Greek word that we get our modern term presbyter or Presbyterian church from. And that's the word that we translate in English as elder. And this word could refer to older men. In fact, that's mainly how it's used, but it does often refer to elders, which are specific in this case. So, the Greek word episkopos, that's this one, episkopos, is where we get our word Episcopalian from, like the Episcopalian Church, and it means overseer. And that's the word that we translate in English as bishop. And because we call it that, an overseer is the same word, because their task was to oversee the congregation. Let's look in 1 Peter 5 real quick. 1 Peter 5 and verses 1 and 2. Therefore I exhort the episkopos among you as your fellow elder, so Peter was an elder also, and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd, that's another one of our words. That word there that he uses is poimen. So he's saying, it's a different form of this verb. It's the action form of this word. But he's saying that these two are the same. So in this verse, he's using both of those words to refer to the same person. Shepherding the flock of God among you, exercising oversight. That's our presbyter word. So all three words there referring to the same person. It says, exercising oversight not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness. So that's the word bishop, the episkopos, the overseer. The last word or the second to last word we want to look at is poimen, and that's the word that we get for shepherd or pastor. So it makes a little more sense. Maybe I should have put that chart on this slide instead of the last slide, but the words that we use for these people, bishop, presbyter, pastor, these are all words that mean nothing outside of religion. We've created those words because we feel like they're positions of honor and glory, and they don't mean anything outside of religion. They have no application. And so this word is typically used of an actual shepherd in the field. So when Peter says you need to shepherd the flock, it's figurative language. He's using the idea of a shepherd leading the sheep to the pasture. So the task was to shepherd and feed the flock of God. And these aren't three distinct offices, but different ways to describe the men and their work. And so elders were only appointed after they met stringent qualifications. And we can see those qualifications in 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy is a great resource if you're looking for trying to find out what an elder is and what their job was and different things. 1 Timothy 3, and I'll just read verses 1 through 7 there. It's a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is fine work that he desires to do. So that word there, overseer, is what we also call bishop. If an overseer then verse 2. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, uncontentious, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, lest he become conceited and fall into condemnation, incurred by the devil. And must have a good reputation with those outside of the church, that he may not fall into reproach in the snare of the devil. Let me just make one quick comment here. Both the King James and the New American Standard say must. He must have those qualifications. And that idea is thoroughly conveyed by the Greek words that are used. But there is no Greek word for must when in the translation. So in the Greek, like I was saying, we have words that agree and they point to one another. And so when this word says that it refers to this word by the way it's set up, by the way they're set up, whether it's gender, tense, case, a bunch of other determinations, that means they have to be that way. So in English, we supply the word must. And so let me move on. Yeah, it's italicized.
Every one of them got together and said, what about it?
It has to be that way because the Greek word says it has to be that way. And so there's a couple other things that happen like that in English that we have to supply. Like when we're talking about in general, if I say a chair, there's no a chair in Greek because there's no indefinite article. It's always the chair. They're always talking about that specific chair. And so in English, when there's an indefinite article, we know that was supplied by the translators. But anyway, let me get back on track. So elders were appointed after they met these stringent qualifications. You can see, there was a whole list of things that this person needs to be, and so they must be. There's not any exceptions there. The husband of one wife. They need to have faithful children. And those qualifications were there to prepare them for their role, it says in verse 5, that it prepares them for their role in the church. And so in every congregation with elders, there's every time it's mentioned in the New Testament, the word here is presbyterion that's used. So when we're talking about a specific person, when it says an elder must be, it's the singular version of that, presbuteros. But when they refer to a church, they always use the plural, presbyterion. And that's because there were elders, plural, in every church. In Acts 14:23, we just read that. When they had gone to those churches, they appointed elders, plural, in each church. So the church in Jerusalem had elders in Acts 15. It wasn't just Peter in charge of the church in Jerusalem. He was one of a group of at least two, because you have to have two to make it plural. So the church at Ephesus had elders, and that's in Acts chapter 20 and verse 17, and 1 Timothy. So there were to be elders in every city. Titus chapter 1 and verse 5. So when one was sick and they wanted prayer, we studied James, or I've referred to it before. They were to call the elders, plural, and to come and pray over them. So other things that are kind of related to that might be younger people were supposed to submit to the elders. We read that in 1 Peter chapter 5. We never read of just one elder or one bishop over one church or group of churches. And so the authority of the elders then is limited. They were to take heed of the flock that was among them. That's Acts chapter 20 and verse 8. Acts chapter 20, not 19. 28, sorry. Acts chapter 20 and verse 28 says, "Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which is purchased with his own blood." So they were to oversee the flock in that particular area. This was not a citywide thing. It shouldn't have been. It started, that's how the apostasy started. We had several groups in one area, and they decided, well, we want to put this bishop over the several groups. And that eventually led to the Catholic apostasy, and we have one bishop over many groups. And then there was a bunch of infighting in 300, 400 AD, all the way up to 600, when finally one person just declared themselves bishop over the Catholic, the universal church, over all churches. And that's how that one happened. That's how the Catholic Church came about. So we never read of just one elder or bishop over more than one church. So the authority then was limited. They were to watch over the flock, like we just read. They were to shepherd the flock of God, which is among you. That's also in 1 Peter 5. We read that. No elder or bishop or pastor or group of elders has any authority beyond the local congregation. The only word we didn't go over, just for time's sake here, was steward, and the word is oikonomos, and it's used of the same person who would tally things up. So like a treasurer, he's in charge of the treasury. But let's move on here so we can save some time. So the pattern then, so we have elders, which is the same as overseers and pastors and deacons. They're all the same. Deacons serve the elders and the congregation. This word literally comes from the word diakonos, which means servant or minister. This was in Acts chapter 6, when we see them the first time show up. They were people who were waiters. They waited on tables. That's what they did. This is not some high position that carries some esteem with it. They assisted the elders in the work of the church. And there's qualifications for them also. To save a little time here, we won't read it, but you get the idea. They're very similar to the elders. They're not, all the things listed are not quite the same, but you can read them there in 1 Timothy chapter 3 if you want to. And the work they do is a noble work, but the deacons then are ministers, they're servants. And so that's the idea here. And then in the last category, so we have elders and deacons, and in the last category we have everybody else. Because while preacher is the role that I fill, it is not an office in the church. And so everybody else fits into the category that we commonly call saints. And the word for that is hagios. And hagios means holy one who's sanctified, set apart in the New Testament. And they're also called, like we're studying in the morning, they're also called disciples, they're also called Christians, believers, etc. So among those members, there's different roles that they fill. whether it's evangelists or teachers. Evangelists are people that take the gospel to those who are lost and spread the gospel in the community. As the visible front of that, that doesn't mean they do it by themselves. Teachers teach, they instruct, they edify members. And so we also should probably note that those commonly referred to as preachers or ministers probably do the work of both the teacher and the evangelist, like we see in 1 Timothy chapter 4. So, but whether any of us serve as an evangelist, a teacher, a preacher, a minister, or within the local church, they have to submit to the leadership or the oversight of the elders. So there's no indication that they had any type of authority or right to make decisions akin or like what was given to the elders. And so, in fact, they're specifically instructed to take heed of the word, whereas the elders were instructed to take heed to the flock. And so there's a little bit of difference there in what their duties are. The duty of the deacon or the member of the church, that's you and me, is to carry out the word. And the job of the elder is to oversee, to make sure we're doing those things. So, let me just read. I've been meaning to reference this, and I haven't been. In Philippians 1:1, it's just a really clear presentation because Paul is addressing his letter to the church at Philippi. Paul and Timothy. It says, Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Jesus Christ, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi, including the overseers and deacons. So, other than the members, the saints that we talked about, the hagios, what organization existed in the local church was a two-tier system. There was bishops, known as elders and pastors, and there was always more than one, and then we have deacons who ministered to the congregation under the oversight of the overseer, the bishops, the elders. And so the organization of the local church then really shows that there's three main parts to it. There's the elders that reflect the work of edification, that's building people up. So an elder can also teach to build somebody up, but he can also should have the wherewithal to follow up with people to make sure that he can check on their spiritual needs, their physical needs. And deacons then reflect the work of what might be called benevolence. That's physically carrying out the task of, like in Acts chapter 6, when the widows were being overlooked, they physically went out and carried out those tasks. They are the waiters. They are the yard men. They are that type of situation. And then we have teachers and evangelists and the rest of us. So, but it really wasn't long before changes in that organization occurred. It really was just a couple hundred years and they had really departed from it. And so in our next Sunday, I want to study about how that happened. I want to look at what happened, how it happened, and what changes often occur in the present day. And so let me just hit a couple things that are on this chart, and then we'll call it a night. So we have, it's just not centered. It's different on my screen. So we have the four words here, presbyteros, bishops, pastors, and baptism. This is just another example of words that weren't translated, and they were transliterated. You can see the Greek word here, baptizo, and the English word that they created was baptism. Instead of translating it into a word in English, oftentimes they try to carry over that word. But if these words are really meaningless outside of religion. And so this is really what they mean. This is the translation of the word. It means immersion. Poimen means a shepherd, a person in the field. And episkopos means somebody who oversees the situation. We've changed those to bishop and pastor and those types of things. But these are the words I prefer. It's not to say that these are necessarily wrong. It's just they don't convey meaning like the English language should. But they all refer to the same office. And so elder or presbyter is used in Acts chapter 20 here. It's also used in Titus 1. It's also used in 1 Peter 5. And then we can go down the list and you can see the chart. All three of these, the first three, are used in Acts chapter 20. And so we know that they're referring to the same person. In Titus, these three are used. In 1 Peter, these two are used to reply to the same person. So that's the message for today. If you have any need, as far as spiritual need or physical need, please let us know, and we'll stand and we'll sing the final song.